For this, I have decided to do something entirely different. Typically, I would always start by discussing all the different parts of the conversation and then tie it all together at the end. But for this, I've decided to do something different and start with tying it all together first and just showing you and help you connect to the depths of this thing. First of all, I know it, for a lot of people, when we say city planning or town planning, what comes to mind is approval and building control. But to show you how city planning or town planning is way deeper and even more personal than a lot of us think it is. So I have created this illustration to show you exactly how deeply connected city planning is. Beyond housing, beyond how we live, beyond master plans and layouts, how city planning actually decides and influences the economy. So as you can see, this is just a projection of all the different layers in the hierarchy of how they influence city planning. For me, this is a curated version of this conversation. And the main thing that I want you to see in all of this, the main thing that I want you to note in all of this is the previous layer affects or determines what happens in the subsequent layer. So geography decides and determines what happens at the ecology layer, that is the water and all of that. Transportation determines economy, economy determines zoning. Now, you remember I said town planning or city planning affects the economy. What we call land use, what town planners or city planners call land use, what we call residential, commercial, agricultural, is basically the economic layer of the city. So it is the land use that determines the economic layer, because with the economy, with the land use, we determine what do we use this place for. And on the next layer, which is zoning, we then decide how much of this activity do we want. So if in the economy layer, we say agricultural in this zone, how much of agricultural use are we asking for? For the commercial use, the zoning determines and decides how much of that commercial are we going to have, how much of fully commercial, how much of a blended commercial, or how much of an integrated commercial system we're going to have. So you see how everything ties to everything, and how from as little as the water features of that location determines how housing at the end of the day is being done. And so to further show you how well or how dependent, interconnected, and interwoven these systems are, let's remember that in the last 2 or 3 videos that I published, the first one says to make rental housing more adequate and more affordable, we must look into zoning. And the second one also says to solve and make our neighborhoods productive, to make our neighborhoods housing, our estates more economically viable and productive, we look into the economy layer, the land use. And for this conversation, what I'm saying is for us to make economy itself work, to make the state economic vibrant and work, we need to look into the transportation systems layer. This is where we talk about the transportation facilities and transportation infrastructure. And of course, I'm aware that for most of us, when we mention transportation, what comes to mind is, oh, more BRTs, bigger, wider roads, so that we reduce traffic congestion, and let's remove all these rickety downfall buses. But all of that is just one layer of this transportation system. It's just the facilities, the means and modes, the mediums of expressions of transportation, the means of commute. But the more important layer, the one that forms the economy, that determines housing outcomes, that determines quality of life, wellness, and health of residents, is the transportation infrastructure systems. And to correlate everything in this image to real life examples that we are all aware of, let's go down the memory lane of how Lagos got this infrastructure that currently powers and drives its economy as of today. Most of the high value infrastructure development or infrastructure resources that Lagos has, in examples of the seaports, the airports, and the bridges, came in the 70s when Nigeria fell into the oil boom, and at a time when Lagos was still the economic and national capital of the country. So by default, it got all these heavy investment in economy molding infrastructure. It was within this period that most of the infrastructure resources that powers even Nigeria's economy up to today were created and developed. But the point in all of this is Lagos became a victim of its own success, such that as much as this investment in this infrastructure catapulted Lagos' economy, Lagos as a state hasn't matched that level of investment to drive its own economy. Of course, I know that Lagos leads. Lagos is typically an example for other states to copy. However, the amount of infrastructure, the level and the rewards of the amount of infrastructure that Lagos got warrants that it invests as much into developing and fast tracking its own economy. I mean, To whom much is given, much more is expected. And maybe you're wondering why always Lagos? Maybe it's because for more than a decade now, all of my tax deductibles have gone to Lagos. So maybe it's just because a better Lagos equals better lifestyle for me. A greater Lagos means a greater Lagos for me and my children. But I digress. So let's go back to why, if we really want economic development, if we really want true, sustainable, long lasting economic development for the city, we must go back to the layer that powers it, the transportation infrastructure systems layer that powers it. But in this case, beyond just building roads or beyond just building bridges, beyond just building airports and flyover bridges, but with the intentionality and purposefulness of using it to drive development, using transportation to build, increase, and influence city development in what we call transit oriented development. So, what is transit oriented development? Remember that in the last video, I said for us to make our estates, our neighborhoods more economically productive, we need to make them more walkable. And now, transit oriented development says, even though now you have these walkable neighborhoods, these self sufficient neighborhoods, but because in the reality, none can function or survive by itself, goods, services, value, people must move in between these zones, in between these neighborhoods to exchange value, because it is in that value exchange that GDP grows, that government makes taxes and revenues. Because GDP in itself is not just because we export oil, but rather by taking the proceeds of that oil exportation and putting it back into the economy to build resources that enables businesses transact and exchange value, exchange services for value, to enable businesses create products, real products that real customers pay real money for. And it is in these individual transactions, it is in the volume of those individual transactions that the government then takes. So it is in the volume of successful, profitable transactions that the economy grows, and not just by speaking grammar and creating policy documents. So even though these neighborhoods are self-sufficient, such that residents can find and get everything they need within 5 minutes or 10 minutes walking distance. However, because in reality, goods and services must still be exchanged within these neighborhoods, and residents must move within these neighborhoods to deliver and exchange services and value, we then introduce transportation amenities within these neighborhoods such that with just 5, 10, or 15 minutes walking, cycling, or just accessing BRTs, jetties, trams, train stations, residents can reach or access those economic opportunities that lie in other neighborhoods. And this is the essence, and at the same time, the irony of transit-oriented development, that it is not about transportation, but really to reduce car dependency, to reduce the need for people, the need for residents to commute. So transit-oriented development is more about the development than about the transit. It is about making development so integrated, so connected, yet so independent, yet self-sufficient, that every resident can access and reach every economic opportunities within just 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or 15 minutes walking distance, cycling distance, or reaching mass transit station. So it is more about making sure that economic activities, economic opportunities exist in immediate environments of people. And where this is either economically or technically not feasible, we then make sure that such residents, such people live close and can access transportation facilities, to bring transportation facilities to them so that they can reach and access those opportunities within that same walking, cycling, or reaching mass transit distance. So it's basically just simplifying the city, or seeing the city as a living system of interconnected, interwoven, interdependent environment, where each environment is self-sufficient and connects them to improve value exchange and economic productivity for urban development. And that is why one of its key objectives is to reduce car dependency. So in order to drive economic productivity, to improve economic development, we then weave roads, rail tracks, tram lines, BRT stops into these neighborhoods, such that it's then easy for people to access them without having to drive or use their cars. And I'm sure that at this point, what comes to mind of an average Lagosian is, how will this work? Because even though it makes sense on paper for sustainability, for eco-friendliness, for reducing noise pollution, it makes sense. But the reality of Lagos is such that the real question is, how do you convince people to leave the comfort, the safety, the cleanliness, and the convenience of driving their car for rickety, haggard, dirty, uncoordinated, and stressful downfall buses? The first justification for this is the fact that, or in the fact that building wider roads, making our road wider, will not solve traffic congestion. Say, for example, we increase Lekki Ekpe to 10 lanes, will just mean more people will go back to driving. Even though building more roads and making them connected, building more road network may solve this problem. But that may also be a temporary solution, as more roads, more open roads will mean more people buying more cars and more people relying on cars, which means more people will work in VI and will live in Ijebu-Ode. So the real solution is to reduce the need for people to commute, which is why it is important that each neighborhood is self-sufficient, hence the 5 or 15-minute city. So by reducing the amount of commuters and easing the tension on these available roads while government builds more, we will reduce traffic congestion, and by so doing, save time, improve health and vitality for residents. So if leaving your car at home will help you save 1 hour or 2 hours in traffic time, 2 hours or 1 hour productive time that you can use to do more business, that you can spend improving yourself, that you can spend with family, or even just spend sleeping, I'm sure for that value, most people will not mind ditching their cars for these same rickety downfall buses, because the value now justifies the trade-off. And even the city as well won't mind gaining that productive man hours for economic growth. And talking about downfall buses, this brings me to how TOD, how transit-oriented development, will also eliminate the inefficiency of these informal mass transit facilities and infrastructure. I mean, the inefficiency with which our BRTs run, the inefficiency with which our NURT, road transport associations, our motor parks, our bus parks, and even our BRT lanes work. Because say government does not have the willpower to actually manage or deal with these union people, these road transport people, transit-oriented development gives the government an upper hand, a leverage to build, to grow and build a new form, a new habit of commuting. So imagine that now most neighborhoods are self-sufficient, and in between or woven into these neighborhoods are tram stops, train stops, BRTs, mass transit facilities that helps the people commute within just 5 minutes walking distance to their places of work and back, such that most people now no longer need these buses and taxis for their daily commute. This flexibility that government gives the people now produces two results. First is it gives the people the power to decide their own form of means of commute, whereas it also returns power to the government to now set the standard for what the means of commute, for what the quality of transportation facilities would be. Because people now have to choose between the neat and coordinated tram lines, the neat and coordinated buses, the neat and AC controlled government sponsored facilities, and the rickety, haggard looking and unsafe privately operated downfall buses. So on one hand, this raised standard means that only companies, private organizations that are ready to compete, to match and even surpass government standard will now be the ones that would operate in the transportation industry. And on the other hand, because government is now the one setting the standard, setting the pace, this gives the government the leverage to now control the quality of transportation, the price of transportation, and even the issues of administration of transportation organizations. And the way this benefits the people, the residents, is because it is now a competition between government, private, and even semi-private. This competition means the government will continually upgrade and improve the quality of the service, the quality of ticketing, the ease of boarding, the quality of service, to improve safety and reduce delays, to reduce and eliminate queues at BRT stations, and also improve and increase the number of routes. All of which trickles down as better transportation facilities, seamless logistics, better service delivery, improved commerce and trades, and an overall better commuting experience for the people. So now, if all of this, as simple as all of this sound, if all of this is making you wonder why Lagos hasn't up to now implemented any of this, how, even though how simple, how straightforward this is, and how when implemented, all of these results will just make people's lives better, and that makes you wonder why it hasn't been implemented yet. Let's get into the interesting part of this transit-oriented development. And first of all, we must acknowledge the reality of this rich man planning style, this GRA living style, because from Bega to Ekpe to Badagry, Everywhere is one family, one man, one building per plot type of development. So first of all, we must acknowledge that this rich man planning style does not work in our low income economy and high density neighborhoods. And because of that, we must transform how we build and develop the city, how we use land from this real estate market driven development model into a really integrated kind of development. This one man, one family per plot means of development, means of land use that is not sustainable, that is wasting our economic layer. Remember our image and how I said the land use layer is really our economic layer. So this one family per plot everywhere kind of land use that is costing the city land and unsustainable infrastructure cost has to stop. Because before we can move from this car-friendly city development model, we need to stop wasting land. We need to stop wasting the land that we don't have in the name of future value and start using land efficiently. And the reason this is very important is because from this, our economic layer, this land use layer, how we use land is what determines our economic outcomes. So it is really important that, especially for Lagos, that doesn't have that much land, to stop this sprawl development and switch into a more compact, more integrated land use development model that fits the mega city that it's supposed to be. Yes, Lagos is ahead, but at the same time, it needs to acknowledge that its physical environment is also its economic environment. And to remind you how important this is the fact that if a 1970 infrastructure is still powering and giving back to the country, even in 2026, what was the size of Nigeria's GDP at then, and what is the size now? So if we want to improve our productivity, if we want to improve our economic development, we must pay attention, especially for Lagos, to how we use land. And the solution to this, even though I have simplified it into different smaller topics, is one single thing: income responsive, compact, integrated land use. Income responsive, integrated, and compact land use. This is how best Lagos can maximize its economic layer for economic outcomes. Back to our illustration, and also bearing in mind the previous video where I said to solve housing, we look into the neighborhood layer, and to make the neighborhoods productive, we look into the economic layer. Same way, if we want to build our economy, if we want to grow our economy, we need to look into the transportation and infrastructure layer. This is how we improve and grow productivity, economic self-sufficiency, by simply maximizing the development potential of our economic layer of land use. It is land use that determines where we do business, how we do business, and how much of the same business we do. But unfortunately, it is the same land that we underutilize by locking them behind gated estates and isolated neighborhoods, that we cannot manage well and service properly with adequate infrastructure, that we do not even have a functional digitized land administration system by which we can capture and convert the value in these lands as economic value. It is the same land that we cannot leverage for economic productivity or cash flow. And yet, every year, the biggest headache of the government is how to increase and improve revenue generation. Meanwhile, it is by connecting transportation facilities and transportation infrastructure to every 10 or 15 or 5 minutes of that economic layer that we can unleash its economic potentials. I mean, this is how cities flourish. This is how cities attract serious global investment opportunities, not by favoring certain individuals to keep one bungalow on a $6 billion worth of land, that the only way to capture its value is to use it as collateral. The way we use, build, and develop land is the biggest decider, is the first decider of our economic outcomes. And I hope this helps.